joined by Doron Isaacs, who is the coordinator of Equal Education, a community-based civil society formation. He joins us from Cape Town. Mr. Isaacs, good evening. Thanks for joining us. 7% of our schools have library, just 7%. That's a shocking figure. How did we get here?
We got here because of a long history of neglect of most of the schools in our country, where poor education was deliberately given to the majority of people in this country. But we also got here because over the last 15 years, we haven't prioritized literacy in the way that we should. Since democracy, we've had 6 drafts of a national policy on school libraries, and still no national policy, no plan to have libraries in our schools. And that's why we are sitting with 7% of our schools having functional libraries.
Why is there no movement on those draft policy positions? Is it a case of the education department perhaps being overwhelmed with so many competing interests in this particular sector?
I think it's true that there's so many things we need to do in education. There's no one solution. We're very encouraged to see the positive moves by our teachers today. Obviously, they're critical to the improvement we need. But I think one of the reasons why there hasn't been a movement is because us, the citizens, the people of this country, the parents, the learners, haven't been demanding them, haven't been asking for them and ensuring that they arrive in our schools. So Equal Education, the organization I'm part of, is doing that. We are campaigning for a national policy on school libraries to ensure that every child in this country has books to read for pleasure and to help them in their schoolwork.
Now, Department of Education official has recently said that providing all schools with libraries is simply unattainable. How do you respond to that?
We were very shocked to read that statement by the Department of Education, saying that school libraries are unattainable. To us is tantamount to giving up on the country. We can't say that we are the victims of our past. We have to recognize how cruel, how unjust, how unequal it was, and then commit ourselves to changing that. We can't say that only the rich are going to have libraries in their schools because they can afford to install those libraries with school fees. We have to make sure that every single school in this country is able to provide their grade 1 learners with books to read. I often imagine what it would be like to be 7 years old and going to school tomorrow, the first day of school, and being given one reading book, and that being the only book that I get to read during the course of the year, not being able to go to the library and take out other books to improve my reading. You can go into so many schools in this country and ask the children to retrieve the book which they're familiar with, and they'll read it to you. But then give them any other book of the same standard, and they can't. They've memorized one book, but they actually can't read. And so it's so vital that we actually take this campaign forward and make sure that our schools have got libraries.
Does the budget have enough money to do this? I mean, it's always allocated the biggest chunk of the budget, 140 billion rand last year. Do we have additional money to build libraries at every school in the country?
Nikki, over the last few months, Equal Education's undertaken an extensive study of what would it cost the country to build school libraries, looking at the physical infrastructure, the materials, the books themselves, the training of librarians, which we don't have, and also the salaries. Now, to provide the physical infrastructure, the materials, and the training would cost in the region of 7.4 billion, which over 10 years is less than 1% each year of the Department of Education's budget, and it's also, I might add, a lot less than we spent on World Cup stadiums. When we add in the salaries, it's about 1.5% of the annual budget. That's less than we spend on a program like the school feeding scheme, which is also very important, but it tells you libraries are something we can afford.
But Doron, until such time that we get enough money and we're spending it on the libraries, is the situation in South Africa that if you're poor and you're not at a private school or not in a well-resourced community, you're not going to be able to learn properly?
I don't want to say that to young people. We should be saying to young people, use everything you've got, do the best you can do, work hard, have hope, but at the same time, young people have to realize that they need to make sure that their own schools improve. Because 6 years ago, when the current matrics who've just got their very poor results were in grade 6, the Western Cape government did a literacy survey. The children in the previously Department of Education and Training schools, the schools that the apartheid government set up for black children, 4% of those children were literate. Those are now the matrics of 2009 that we wanted to get these wonderful results. And the situation has changed slightly, but not much. So in 6 years' time again, the current grade 6s are going to be in matric, and if we don't give them the resources they need to read, we'll be in the same situation.
Has the private sector made enough of a contribution in this battle?
No, definitely not. I think that many people in the private sector are starting to understand that education is in crisis in South Africa, and for the purposes of the economy, for the purposes of our national development, for the purposes of solving all kinds of social problems that we have in the country, it's in everyone's interest, including those in the private sector, to do something about education. But not enough is being done by the private sector, and they should join hands with government, join hands with civil society, and invest in our schools. But our government's got to take the lead. It's from them that we want a national policy.
Thanks to Doron Isaacs. He's a coordinator of Equal Education, joining us from our studios.